So, fountains. Fountains are fairly simple. You have a little reservoir of water at the bottom where water collects, and this submersible water pump here, which connects to an adapter and some 1/4-inch vinyl tube, I think. The first pump I bought turned out to be much too powerful. I tried fixing this by venting out some of the water through this coupler to ease the water pressure, and it helped a little but not quite enough. So I ended up picking up a smaller pump, about 5 watts. This fountain I wanted to be like one of those round garden fountains, and I settled on a 3-piece design. First is the reservoir at the bottom. Pump sits at the bottom, pumps the water that the reservoir reserves for it. On top of that is a bowl. The bowl will catch all of the water from the fountain, preventing it from spilling all over the place. Finally, there's a grate that sits in the bottom of the bowl, but on top of the reservoir. This grate is important because I want to put some rocks in this bowl to hide the contents of the reservoir underneath. But water can still reach the reservoir through the holes in the grating. If you're confused about this, it makes more sense once it's modeled and printed out. Right, so first I made a really rudimentary reservoir here. The pump sits at the bottom here. These standing wall bits here are to hold the pump in place and to prevent it from tipping over. There's also some small cutouts in the wall here that allow the power cable for the pump to pass through the reservoir. Next is the bowl that sits on top. If you'll notice here, there's a super over-engineered bit of geometry that I'm really proud of. Basically, this triangular groove makes it so the bowl can sit on top of the reservoir here without sliding around. You can see that the reservoir has a matching protrusion on top as well. All these surfaces are also at a 45-degree angle to the wall, because that means I can print this overhang of the bowl without supports. You thought that was it? I spent 5 hours on this thing. There's also a small overhang here on the inside of the triangular groove. You know when water somehow manages to cling onto upside down surfaces and runs literally everywhere? Well, water can't cling onto completely horizontal surfaces. So this overhang stops water running down the bowl and leaking out through the gap between the bowl and the reservoir. Oh yeah, and there's a cutout here for the grating to sit in. The grating was actually pretty easy. Blender's grid fill very conveniently provided the exact right pattern I needed, and I used a wireframe and then a solidify modifier to turn it into a mesh. So this is how the fountain works. Reservoir here with the pump, bowl sits on top to catch the water, fitting in place with this groove, and the grating holds the rocks that hide the reservoir and also the centerpiece of the fountain. Speaking of the centerpiece, can you guess what it's going to be? Yeah, it's going to be a massive cock-a-doodle-doo. Obviously, I made this very average sized. Using Blender's sculpt mode, I also added some roughness to the centerpiece. This makes it appear more lifelike and natural. It's a very subtle effect, but the side-by-side between the original model is like night and day. I also had to make sure it was nice and anatomically accurate. I also needed to add a hole to the top of this where the tubing will go. This way, the water will spray out all over the top here. I sent this to my slicer, which I sliced in 3 parts: the reservoir, the bowl, and the grating and centerpiece combined. Combining them gave the structure a bit more rigor. I decided to print the fountain in this nice cedar PLA. After all, it makes sense for the wood to be made out of wood. In goes some water. Good. Makes for a very classy centerpiece. The centerpiece is slightly too straight, I think, unnatural, but this entire thing is against God anyway, so I don't think it matters that much. I'd try running milk through it, but I don't think the pump's rated for that. I love John F. Kennedy. He was such a cool guy and did so much for the United States of America, God bless. So I wanted to make a nice commemorative fountain for him. This fountain's going to be a little bit different. It's going to have a semicircular reservoir, and the centerpiece is going to be above the reservoir here, above the pump. The centerpiece this time is obviously going to be a bust of JFK. Where does the water come from? That's a surprise! The centerpiece sits atop this little lid here, which in turn rests atop the reservoir, allowing me to access the pump. If you've ever opened up your toilet, it's a bit like that. So the reservoir here is pretty simple. I had to edit in the semicircular part of the reservoir afterwards, but it wasn't that bad. I pretty much just added in a cylinder, extruded it, then cut off half before booleaning it all together. There's also a cutout archway here that allows for the water to reach the pump from the semicircular portion out here. Then I made the lid that sits atop the reservoir with the bust, pulled off of Thingiverse of course. I finally learned my lesson this time and included a 1mm margin for the lid for tolerance, and also added the cutout for where the vinyl tubing would run through the centerpiece and spurt out into the reservoir. And yeah, I know he wasn't shot in the chest, but the vinyl tube would have looked way too large coming out of his head, so yeah, proportions. Sliced and printed, and there we go. For a first print, this one actually turned out quite well. I would have preferred to go with a higher infill setting to give it more weight and like a quality feeling, but I was running low on my gold filament, so I would have run out. Hee hee. Peace.